Welcome aboard the Mad Pastors Podcast. Honest pastors, honest conversations. Powered by G6 Allies. You may now feel free to move about the podcast. Welcome back.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you guys.
Honorary Mad Pastors in the audience. It's good to see y'all. I hope that you poured yourself a cup of Joe. If you have a cell phone, you could be watching this anywhere with your cup of Joe. So anyway, we're glad every week to get to
But probably
do this.
not while you drive. Just listen. Don't watch.
That's true. You can catch this. If you're watching this on video, it's hard while you drive. But if you're going to listen to it on audio, you can do it anywhere you podcast. On Spotify, on Apple, on some kind of other. I mean, does anybody really
Google Play?
Anything else other than that?
Google Play.
Is Google Play that big? I mean, it's Google, so
It's
probably big.
It's probably 10 to 15% of our podcast downloads.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Well, 15% matters. And so, hey, we've been growing our video podcasts on YouTube and have loved hearing from you guys and seeing more
comments.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
We tied on the Brittany Runs a Marathon.
We did.
Episode 66.
We did. It was equal.
Yeah.
Which means I win.
Oh, wow. That is a terrible rule. But either way.
Default goes to the host. And since we record this from my house, I win.
Oh, well, okay. But we're co-hosts, so just leave me alone. So all that to say, today we wanted to talk about something that I think it's incredibly important, but it's kind of hits close to home to us. We have people all over the country that are pastors, are lay people. I mean, it was so cool. I've been hearing from one of our listeners every week. I get an update where they send me both their favorite and least favorite quotes that we make. Usually it's a joke about something funny that we say, and then I got a hilarious text that was like, man, so good, when we said something good and then said, and followed up immediately by the horse before Descartes. And so just solid
That was
stuff.
pretty bad.
It was. But man, it was cool to hear from a father who said, I want my daughter to listen to you guys talk about deconstruction because she's working through things in her faith. Mm-hmm. And so the more that we do this, and the more that we pick these things, it's just cool to watch it grow. So listen, please, if you're not a pastor, you should be watching this. If you are a pastor, you should be watching this. So really, the world is split into two categories, pastors and not pastors, and both should be listening to this podcast. So there you go.
I thought you were going to say it's split into two categories. Cool people, and then those who don't watch this show.
That's true. That's true.
Looking out for you guys.
That being
you guys
said,
are amazing.
You are cool. But everybody has something to learn in this podcast. And so today we've got some really good friends to our ministry, to G6 Allies. So the Mad Pastors, if you didn't know, are powered by G6 Allies. That's where we are both pastors at a local church and work across the country with other pastors doing not because we think we know everything, but because we've been beaten up too and been in the trenches, and we just want to be there for other pastors and church people. And so we have some really great friends to G6 Allies who are going through an incredibly messy and difficult situation in their church. Anybody that expects the church to be perfect or to not go through difficult times has either never read the Bible or doesn't have common sense.
Well, they've not been around a church for very long.
Well, that's a good
point. Any
point.
church.
That's a good point. Or been in one long enough to know that
they've never met people.
So, the truth. But we have a church, some members are financial supporters. I think that they're prayer supporters too, as prayer partners. But this church is literally, has been in the process for a while, but it's been kind of a staple in the community for years. It was. And as the community has grown, other churches have come in. So it's there's some self-importance in it. But outside of that, it's in the middle of just imploding and watching a lot of, really difficult things. And so I've been close to it. I've been with those people. There's so many of those people that love us. And some things disappoint me when I see that. Obviously, we're disappointed in how it's happening, but people's responses, I thought, let's talk about what a church imploding really looks like, and how do we as believers and as people who are wanting to be healthy, pastors or not, how do we respond to that? And that is such an odd topic, I feel like, but it is one that a lot of people go through this, and this is the kind of stuff that we see people either leave church for or have a chip on their shoulders for the rest of their lives because they don't know how to get this off their back. It hurts them and they live in that hurt. And it's like there's always one thing to say, well, man, that was a hard time. But we don't sometimes it seems to send believers into an arrested development almost, where they're just like, well, I'm never going to, I've had people come up to me at other places and go, I'm never going to serve in this capacity in a church again because I was hurt. And I'm like, man, but that's not what Jesus wants for you.
Or I'm just done with church. I'm not.
Yeah. Oh, that happens a lot.
I've been hurt too many times. I'm not going back. I'm done.
Well, and I noticed, have you ever heard of the Instagram account, Honest Youth Pastor? Mm-hmm. I really appreciate his stuff. I appreciate what he writes. Maybe one day we can get him on here if he'll respond to us because he's big time. So, maybe he doesn't have time for us. But he posted something great the other day that was, it said, I love Jesus, but I hate the church. Or I love Jesus, but I don't love his church. And just talked about the idea that no doubt we can be hurt. I love how he handles the comments with grace, right? And so when you've got a lot of people that immediately go, well, I've been hurt, and can you imagine somebody else walking into a church like this? And I'm like, well, first of all, don't imagine somebody else. You can't take other people's hurt on. So, but for you, and his whole point was we cannot say that we love Christ. Who told us that if you love me, you'll follow my commands? And then see throughout the New Testament commanding us to gather together as the church and as believers and to meet. And people throw the false dichotomy of the church isn't a building. You're right. It's a group of people. So, but you're not meeting with anybody. Mm-hmm. And so meeting together to spur one another on. And so how do we, let's just start talking about this idea of church. But Michael, how have you seen churches imploding go poorly? And how have you seen them maybe go a little bit better? I know that sounds contradictory, but how have you seen the good come out of that and people handle that in a good way?
Well, I think there can be some good out of it because it can be an implosion can ultimately be a pruning process. Yeah, where it's removing, trimming the excess fat, as it were, whether that's through some of the people, whether that's through some of the leadership, whether that's through some bad habits or some culture that needed to change. And that's how God is working to remove those things, that in order for them to get to the point where they want to do something different and be better, they have to basically implode and become a completely different type of church and a whole different makeup and all of that. So there can be some good come out of it. But a lot of times when a church implodes, it just continues to implode until it ceases to exist. Yeah. Which is sad, but that's the reality of it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times what I would say that I think when that happens, it is oftentimes a leadership issue. Yeah. Whoever is leading that congregation does one of a couple of things. One, they try so hard to combat it that they just further run it into the ground. And they try to combat it with some of the same leadership styles and rules that got them there in the first place. Yeah. And so if it's a heavy-handed pastor who has to do all the work himself, the way that he fixes his imploding church is by doing more of the work himself and taking more stuff from other people, which just accelerates the implosion. Yeah. Because the church is not designed to be done by one person. Sure. Another way is that they sometimes kind of dig their heels in and look for a fight, and they want to argue and they want to fight, and they begin to distrust every single person in their church, and it puts the pastor or that leadership team, it pits them against the rest of the congregation. And so now not only are they imploding, they're fighting in the process, which also amplifies the implosion.
Sometimes it doesn't even seem, so this is such a common story, and it's sad that it is common. But also, I do think you're right. It is, God can use these things as pruning processes, and I think that is the ultimate purpose of those at the end of the day, is when we've gone so far off course, there's got to be, eventually you hit the wall, you've got to course correct or just stay stuck in the wall.
Well, and I think a third way that leaders implode their church, and I'm sure there are others, but these are the three that come to my mind. Sure. A third way is that they try the scatter wall approach, where they just scatter as much stuff against the wall as they can and see what sticks. And so, yeah, our church is imploding. That means we got to do something different. And so they start this ministry and they start this ministry and they hire these 6 new staff members that are going to revolutionize the way that they do church. And they just try a whole bunch of different stuff rather than focusing in on what their core value is, which gets to the other side of this here in just a minute.
You say that about the scatter method, and it makes me think, because I've seen this at, we know that some people that are watching this, that are in that situation, will know what church we're talking about. But I'm also bringing in several other churches that I've been at or been around or been a part of. But I do think that I've noticed that this idea of scattering things and starting things, I've seen a lot of every new staff member is going to save the church. Every new hire is going to be the new problem solver. And the problem is, if that's the only thing that's going to solve it, then you've really kind of implicitly said, I'm the problem that can't be fixed. So the real problem has got to start with you. Like, that's no doubt staff members will make things better or healthier, or they'll help bring, new leadership to roles. But I do
fresh perspective.
Yeah. But I have noticed that is always I had a pastor who didn't like how well we were doing, how many kids we were reaching. Like, this ministry had been falling apart and in decline for years. And we brought it back and saw kids starting to actually have real conversations, which some of their parents didn't like, but real conversations about what they were struggling with, what was going on. And I remember when I came, it was, man, this guy's going to fix all these problems and all this stuff. Well, as soon as I started to see it get fixed, it seemed to get healthy and everything else seemed to seem more unhealthy. And then there was this push and attack. Eventually I just said, I'm just going to go. Like, I'm not going to keep doing this with you. But then the next guy they hired, I remember proofing the email that was going out. And the next guy was, this guy's going to reach thousands of students and change our area. And we saw that happen in all kinds of positions. And it's almost like it's this diversion tactic that means we wouldn't say it this way, but never really evaluating me, but always trying to bring something new in, or always this new political issue or this new cultural thing, right? We're always creating enemies where I don't think enemies exist, or saviors where we don't necessarily need saviors.
Yeah.
And I think that can happen.
If we are constantly trying to hire in a Messiah to save our ministry, then our faith, our trust is in the wrong place.
100%.
We're trusting in a person to come in and salvage something, and that's just misguided focus.
And so often, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to switch to the positive side of things now. So we look at those couple of reasons why pastors or leaders can tend to accelerate. It doesn't have to be even a lead pastor. It can be a pastor, a student pastor, or a worship pastor, or whatever, somebody who's over a particular area doing these same things. And unless there's, a superior or an elder board or somebody around them that keeps that in check, the same result is going to occur. Yeah. But on the positive side, I think some things that I've seen pastors do well to curtail an implosion or to completely do a 180 and reverse it, really is the opposite of everything we just said on the negative side, right? So first of all, it does start with you bringing somebody else in to fix your problems. There can be benefits to that, but that's not the root of the problem.
It's got to be supplementary or complementing. It can't just be the fix.
So if you are a leader of a ministry, if you're the pastor, if you're over a particular ministry, if you're a business leader, if you're a manager at a retail store, whatever role you're in, if you're in any kind of leadership role and what you are responsible for starts imploding, the first place you ought to look is yourself.
Yeah.
Because leadership has so much influence, you may not even realize that what you're doing has resulted in the implosion that you see.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing that good leaders do when something starts going bad, and when they start noticing the signs, whether their metrics are suggesting, a recession coming in that ministry area, or whether there's just problem after problem, something has gotten their attention that said something's amiss.
Right.
The first thing you ought to do is not, okay, he messed up, she didn't do her job right, this is because of, COVID or 16 different excuses for why this is the case.
Sure.
The very first thing you ought to be doing that good leaders do, they're going to look at themselves and go, okay, how did I respond to this situation? What could I have done better? What am I doing? I'm asking those who are close around me, is there something in me I don't see? What are those blind spots? What do I need to adjust so that I can be in the best position possible to lead us out of this implosion that is either on us or is coming?
Well, and saying that helps because it's, I see, because not everything, again, you don't want the stereotypical self-deprecating pastor, right, who thinks everything is their fault. But an evaluation attitude like that, I think, does a lot to say if the problem isn't something that you did, or if you can tweak something, but you see there's a problem area over here, I think that it humbles how you deal with that area. Mm-hmm. It's not just to fix it and move on, that you can begin to approach it as hey, let's work on your responses or work on how you can do this. I think another, maybe a warning sign of a church that may be headed in that direction or close to is if their staff is a revolving door. If you see people constantly being hired and fired within a year or two, I mean, we know that honestly, it doesn't speak well for most churches because the average tenure of a lot of pastors now is like 18 to 24 months, and that's not good. That tells me that there are some just broad spectrum leadership issues. But that being said, if somebody can't either stand to be at or survive at a church, now I would think about it this way: if you own a business, if you're a business leader, I mean, you'd be fired if you kept hiring and firing employees all the time. Like if you hired them into key positions and then they were gone, you think about the leverage that you got to hire a pastor to do in most churches. That's a big point of influence. And eventually you do a couple things with that. If nobody can ever stay around very long, that's usually an insecurity thing from a pastor. You either make it so miserable the person won't stay, or you get rid of them because you can't handle it because you're insecure. There's a lot of reasons. But that doesn't mean if there's a couple options that some people do stay and go quickly, that's not always a red flag. But if it's a continual thing,
and if the reason for leaving is that there's good reasons to leave and there's bad reasons to leave, right? And so if you are a leader who is constantly developing those that you are hiring, mm-hmm. and within a year or two, you've developed them, they've flourished, and they've got another opportunity that's better than what you have there. Mm-hmm. That's a good thing. Like we're helping someone else advance to their next level. That's a good thing, but that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking here about bringing somebody in, they don't mesh with the environment, or something goes wrong, or they don't live up to your expectations, and so I don't like this person. Let's get rid of them. Let's bring in the next guy.
Maybe the better question
then you got a real problem. Yeah,
and maybe the better question with all that is if people can't leave well. And I think
mm-hmm.
that's it. If people leave and you never hear about them again, and it's like, whatever, or they always leave and there's always a negative story.
There's always drama or something around it.
And it doesn't mean, I think you got to be careful too, it doesn't always mean the person that talks about the drama is at fault or not. What it means is there's something wrong with the process if that's always how it ends. I mean, I remember serving in a church 10 years ago where the question was asked to the head pastor from one of the upper guys that I heard about later. He said, can anybody leave well? Because nobody leaves well. And I've had to ask people to leave and fire people for you. You've had to do it. Nobody here leaves well, and it's always dramatic. And there wasn't a good answer for the question, but I think the good answer was, we're not leading well here. But the thing that, as a pastor, that concerns me the most is how this affects the people that we lead, the sheep that we shepherd, right, as under shepherds to Jesus. And I think maybe one of the first things is that some pastors don't view themselves as under shepherds. They view themselves as the church, and they're in charge. But at the end of the day, this is where I get most afraid. And in Galatians 5, Paul is writing to a church essentially dealing with a very religious mindset. And when I say that, I mean religion in the terms of it's Judaism, it's how do I earn it? I hate the cliche, it's not a religion, it's a relationship. But I do think that there's some truth to that aspect of Jesus had ceased to be the center focus, and now all the things they could do for Jesus is what they focused on. And when that happened, there's polarization, there's problems, we can do this sin, but not this sin, we can hide here. I mean, Jesus ceases to be the standard. And Paul says, he's talking about life lived by the Holy Spirit. And he says, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but don't use your freedom as freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. He says, but if you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you'll be destroyed by each other. And what I noticed, it's as simple as the phrase and the term, the abused become the abusers. I noticed that almost always in church, whether we're pastors or people, our response becomes just a modified version of what we've left. And what I mean by that is I see people leave churches that are imploding or breaking up, or a hurt situation that they leave from, and either they swear off the church and walk away, so they make an extreme decision like they were treated extremely, or oftentimes they all of a sudden make their next church into their savior, setting themselves up to be disappointed. Mm-hmm. And I see that as an issue. I see another issue in this idea of devouring one another that he talks about, this ripping their flesh, is the idea that we almost, as Christians, we operate under this Machiavellian principle that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that is not a gospel-centered subject. And so what I see is unhealthy people can still expel unhealthy people. In fact, they tend to root out and get rid of other unhealthy people because they're unhealthy and they don't want their kind of unhealth. They want their own brand. Mm-hmm. And so we notice that there's all these unhealthy people around, but what I see often is that they go, well, this person, I've decided this person's incredibly unhealthy at the top of this church or this thing going on. So I'm going to start agreeing with all these other people that left because they're against him. If they're against him, they must be right. And that's not right. In fact, that's the same type of issue that they've come from, right? Where you draw lines and you pick sides. And the biggest question is going to be, there can be 3 or 4 or 5 different sides that are unhealthy. The question is, which side is focused on being like Christ and acting like him? And the question is, if we're biting and devouring one another, if we're trying to choose sides to get this guy because this guy disagrees with him, even though at one point I've decided this guy was not good, that becomes such a messy, and I think the enemy loves that situation because it's incredibly deceptive and destructive all at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think when you leave one place and you go to another one, mm-hmm. you are going to carry some of that culture with you from that other place. And a lot of times we leave, we run from something. So we run from bad culture, we run from a bad leader, and we look for something that's the complete opposite of that. And we think, oh, because this guy is the total opposite of my last boss who I hated, I'm going to love this guy. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to get there and realize that dude's got problems too, right?
And then you're going to hate him for those problems, and then go find the next
exactly.
guy.
And it's a repetitive cycle.
It happens with church people, it happens with pastors. It happens with everybody, but that's becoming what you tried to get away from all at the same time. It's not really growth, it's just change of scenery.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah. And so to continue on the inverse of the mm-hmm. 3 things that we see that leaders do poorly, some of the ways that we can fight the implosion mm-hmm. doing good things would be, one of the things that amplifies the implosion was the constant fighting, right? Sure. And so when leaders dig their heels in and they start to not trust those around them in their church because they think everybody's out to attack them. Yeah. And so everything becomes a fight. Well, the inverse of that is to lock arms and join together and unite under a particular cause or mission, something that brings you together rather than this biting and devouring one another. Yeah. This is what Paul's talking about in Galatians. Guys, stop biting and devouring one another. And instead, you need to love each other. And
it's interesting because he moves on. He goes, the acts of the flesh are obvious. I mean, sexual immorality, sure. Impurity and debauchery, sure. Those are easy for us to stay away from, or sometimes, or idolatry and witchcraft. I mean, I don't know how many people doing witchcraft, but then he says hatred and discord and jealousy and fits of rage and selfish ambition, dissensions and factions. Those sound
all of
painfully close to home.
And anything similar, so anything like this is what's going to destroy you guys.
Yes.
And so we need to be on the lookout for those. We need to avoid those, and we need to be guarded against those. And instead, we need to be loving each other. And as it goes into chapter 6, my favorite chapter, carry one another's burdens. That's the whole point of G6 Allies. And so that's what we're trying to help people recognize is the dangers of this incessant fighting that we do among ourselves. And then that third inverse piece to this that goes along with that is if you're gonna unite them, your people, you have to, as a leader, give them something to be united by.
Right.
There has to be a vision and a
uniting
core,
around trying to attack somebody too is not okay.
No, that's not okay. But there has to be a core value or a core mission or your purpose behind all of it. So rather than the scatterboard method where you're just throwing everything and seeing what sticks, you are identifying, hey, this is who we are. Yes, we're imploding. Our attendance has dropped by 70% in the last year. We've lost lots of staff members. The lead pastor is under fire. All of those bad things that we see happening. Well, the way that you go about fixing that, and sometimes it can't be fixed. Sometimes it needs to implode. It needs to just go away. I hate to say that, but that's the reality. There are many churches or organizations that they are so corrupted or so misguided or just so ineffective at kingdom building that the best thing that can happen, even though it may be painful, is for it just to go away.
Yeah.
And so, but sometimes it can be salvaged and it can be corrected and you can come out stronger. And the way that you do that is you don't just throw a whole bunch of stuff at the wall and see what sticks.
Right.
You find out what it is that this group of people is most passionate about, what we want to rally around, and you focus in on that, you clarify that, and you ring that bell as loud as you can, and you rally the troops around that and say, listen, I know we're going through a storm right now. We're going through hell at this moment. But here's the one thing I want us to get out of this. The thing I want us to take away from this is blank. Whatever that one cause is, let's run everything we do through that filter.
Well, and so often, my black and white personality that doesn't do well, right? I want a right and a wrong. I want a very clear line. And what has bothered me for so many years in so many churches has been the truth that not everybody that gets hurt by the church is a healthy person, or that gets hurt in a church is a healthy person. So that means just because there is somebody healthy in charge and healthy people left, or somebody left, or somebody got hurt, or somebody made a big stink about it, you want to go, well, that person must be a victim. Well, they may not be. They may just be as unhealthy as the other person. They're just catching the raw end this time, or catching the end of it, or whatever it may be. And I think what you're saying is so good because it pulls us back to the idea of saying, no, I need to look, are the actions and how they're acting, is the character they have when they left and what they're doing, is that character that lines up with Scripture and with Christ likeness? Do the people that I'm supporting, when I support these people, or I'm investing, or I'm loving others, are they people that line up as victims who need love, or as perpetrators who are just part of a messed up system? And it was always hard for me to do that. I remember one of the churches that I deeply loved that I was at, they had one pastor had a moral failure. That pastor left. Rather than saying their group of men, their board of directors, instead of saying, okay, we need to find God's man for this church, what they did was they pretty much realized that nobody was going to adopt their church's mission slogan. So rather than be open for change, they just hired the guy that was underneath the pastor, who kind of contributed to the pastor acting the way that he did and the unhealthy culture. Well, then that guy ran the church into the ground. It still hasn't recovered. So then when they hired somebody, they didn't say, we need the guy that God has for us. We need to really focus on this trait or that trait. No, they said, we need somebody that's older, somebody that does these three things. And they made their own list, again, adhered to it. He was worse than the guy before him. And so it's just an interesting truth that I've heard the whole story. And C.S. Lewis, the dictionary doesn't say this, but C.S. Lewis says, the way insanity is doing the same thing continually but expecting different results. And I remember I looked it up one time.
Einstein.
Did Einstein say that? I thought it was Lewis. Wow. No. Odds are Lewis thought it. But Einstein.
I'm pretty sure that was Einstein.
Okay, I'll go with Einstein. Put it in the comments if you know. So either way, but it is an insane truth, but it's one that so many churches fall into, that if we find ourselves never changing how we're doing something to combat an issue or a problem, then we need to ask the question if we're really doing something that's going to help. And but I would say, as we end out, along with what you've been pointing out about the positives, I would say if you're a church member who is struggling, or you're going through a situation like that in your church, I think you've got a couple options. But to honor Jesus, one of them is not, don't go to church anymore. Your options are to stay and fight for that church to be healthy, and do everything you can to divine and discern who is healthy or not, where the pastor's at, where he's not, or to humbly go to a church that's focused on Jesus and not to another church looking for a savior. I think that's where our churches need to be. We don't need to leave in bitterness. You don't need to spew hate. You don't need to throw shade or be passive aggressive towards another church. You need to be who you think Jesus would be, and line up with the same character in Scripture of saying, I'm going to go and live for what is right. I mean, so many of us, churches or not, as believers, we define ourselves by what we are not, because honestly, I don't think we have a good understanding of what we're supposed to be. And so there's that side of it. If you're a pastor and maybe you're in charge of this or on a staff, I think your options are look inwardly to make sure that you're not contributing.
You evaluate yourself first, then you do everything you can to unite people, and then you give them a positive cause to rally around.
Michael, we've looked at it nationally over the last couple of months with a lot of things going on in the SBC. We've looked at it. We've seen it internally at local churches, but we've talked about it over and over, privately. But imagine what would happen if leaders would just say, "I'm wrong. I'm going to do what needs to be done, and I'm going to do what's healthy." They would be heroes to other people. But when we don't do that, it is so obviously difficult and arrogant and drives division. And so if you're a pastor and you're in charge of it, and you know deep down that you need to evaluate or apologize or seek something different or go in a different direction, just do it. It is worth it to do it. Your people deserve it, and you deserve it. So, man, I hope that this is not too heavy, but I think it was good. I was mad, but I was also a pastor, and I felt like it worked all together.
That made you a mad pastor.
What? All right. May your coffee stay hot and your ministry stay healthy. See y'all next time.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Pastors Podcast. Mad Pastors is powered by G6 Allies, who knows that healthy ministry means having the right team behind you to provide worthwhile tools so ministry doesn't destroy you. If you'd like to partner with G6 Allies, here's a couple of ways you can do it. 1, you can rate, subscribe, and review this podcast so that as many people as possible can get the same help and encouragement that you're receiving. You can also visit g6allies.com/partner to see how you can financially partner with us. G6 Allies is dependent on viewers and listeners like you to support our ministry across the nation. If you have any questions or would like to contact the Mad Pastors for any reason, you can contact us at hello@g6allies.com. We'd love to hear from you.